Hi folks, we're going to carry on with sanding and the purpose of sanding. So the funny thing about sanding is that nobody likes sanding. Sanding is a lot of work, however it's a necessary part of the job. And the biggest reason why we want to do that sanding is to prepare that surface in order to receive the finish. Whether it's an oil, whether it's a stain, or whether it's a clear top coat, we still need to prepare that surface. And that surface preparation, that means that we want to remove any machine marks that may have occurred, saw marks or knife marks or anything like that that's still visible. Any storage marks from rubs and marks from getting that material off your work shelf or off your bench. It's all going to leave marks and dents and scratches, and we want to make sure that we clean that up. We also, when we're sanding, we're trying to align the fibers. We want a nice, even, smooth, straight pattern. It makes a difference on what that finish is going to look like, how it absorbs the stain, and so on. And once we're in the finishing room, we're going to be sanding again. We're trying to cut down those protruding fibers. And those fibers, once you apply a sealer or something like that onto the surface, they have a tendency when they dry to stand up. So we need to cut those fibers down in order to produce that smooth surface. And finally, the last reason for sanding is sometimes we sand just to score the surface to get better adhesion. And a good example of that, I just finished a little job last fall that I took on, and that was to restore a staircase for a family. And this staircase might have been about 20 years old. It had a light colored stain, and they wanted it stained to a darker color. And so in order to get that stain, that new stain, to adhere to it, I went in and I did a light sand on all the treads and risers, the railing, and the whole 9 yards, and just to allow that stain an opportunity to bite into the surface. It actually turned out quite nicely, but I've done that on a number of occasions where I've just taken an older piece of furniture, just give it a light sand, recoat it, and I can clean it up quite nicely and give it a whole new life. Okay, so there's a number of things about the sandpaper that we want to start with. First of all, I want to talk about grits. In North America, we use what's called an OT system. In the US and in Canada, we use a CAMI system. And in Europe, they use a P system. And basically what that means is on the back of that sandpaper, they will have coating on here. This particular one, it's an 80 grit. It's a D grade backing on this, and they call it PS10. And it's a scale that is used whether it's in North America or in Europe. They have different scales on how they grade their sandpaper. But we buy a lot of material now. We're getting a lot of our sandpapers coming out of Germany. And so that P system, that grading system, we see we see that on a lot of our sandpaper coming in. But that's just a method of measurement or identification of the different sanding paper products. So when we talk about grits, there's a lot of different materials available on the market. This particular one here, this is a 12 grit, and I know it's probably lower than anybody has seen before. This I picked up on a job a number of years ago. It was came off of a floor sander, and again it's a 12 grit, and it was used for stripping paint off of a hardwood floor. And this was a commercial product or commercial environment that I was in, and so they needed to strip the floor and level it and then reapply a new finish. And in order to, and time is money, so they wanted to do that in a hurry. They brought in this 12 grit, very aggressive. It was a very skilled individual that worked with it, cleaned it up quite nicely. And then once they go over it with that 12 grit, they're going to keep coming up the levels, and they finished off at maybe a 60 or an 80 grit before they actually put the top coats on. But you have to work your way back up. Stuff that I've gotten out of our shop, I have a 24 grit and a 36 grit. This was a 36 grit wide belt that we used a number of years ago. We resanded all the workbenches, and we took them apart, put all the tables through, and we needed something that was going to be a little bit more aggressive, and the 36 grit worked quite nicely for that. The 80 grit was going to just load up with residue and stuff, and it didn't actually work very well, so we had to go lower. We found that we went with the 36 grit to start with, and then put them through the second time at a 60 grit, gave us a nice surface to repurpose those benches. And we used to use the 36 grit in industry for rough sanding, particle board, and MDF. When we're prepping the surface for veneer applications and stuff, you want a fairly rough surface for good glue penetration. When it comes down to backing, I'm just going to finish off my grit system there, and I have with me a number of grits here. And so most of the grits that we're using here at the school, we wouldn't go much higher than maybe a 320, maybe a 400. You might go 600 grit in the finishing room, but for rough sanding you might go as high as 120, maybe a 180 grit. That would be on the high end. I do have some grits here that are little known ones. Here's a 1500 grit and a 1200 grit. I also have a 400 and a 600. The 400 and 600 we use for in the finishing room for wet sanding. They also use grits like that for sanding automotive parts. In order to use for the wet dry, you need to go to a higher level so you eliminate that scratch pattern on your vehicles and stuff, so it's a little bit higher quality. Dave was kind enough to loan me some samples of some really high-end stuff. I have a 3500 grit silicone carbide for wet sanding, and this is crazy. This is a 16,000 grit, and this is something that might be used for polishing jewelry, something of that nature. And so interesting, the different grits that are available out there. When it comes to backing, we have two types of backing on sandpaper, and we have cloth or we have paper. And for paper, that range could be for A, B, C, D, E, or F. The F weights are used on production sanders. Hand sanders and stuff are, we're going to use probably more like an A or B or C. So I'm getting the sign here that we're running low on time, so I'm going to cut it off at that point, and we'll pick up a little bit more of this on another slide. So cut me off there.